My name is Jerry Bradshaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Protection Sports Association. The sport has gone through some evolution since we began it, but ultimately it is a protection and obedience sport. 1/3 of the points come from obedience, about 2/3 of the points come in the protection phase. It is a sport that really tests the ability of the handlers to be able to train their dogs to be ready for all manner of distractions, all manner of environmental difficulties, and extreme amounts of pressure that come from decoys. I think, one of the things that we did initially when we were looking at creating PSA was we took a lot from each of the other sports that many of us were very fond of, whether it was Schutzen, cane TV, Belgian ring, French ring, and so forth. And we kind of made an Americanized version of dog sport. And we said there's certain things. We liked the precision of IPO or Schutzen as it was back in that time. We liked the environmental pressure that came from Belgian ring. We liked, for me, I really liked the pressure that came from the decoys in IPO because we had a drive and stick hits and a lot of pressure that comes over the dog. And then we liked a lot of things about cane PV, the suit sport, the frontal targeting, all of that. So when we designed the sport, we took what we felt were some of the best things from each of those sports. And then we created a 3-level sport initially. We then went back after a couple of years and decided we kind of needed a little entry level, and that's where the PDC came from, which is the entry level now, which kind of serves as our version of the BH as a brevet, which you would find in other sports, right? And so for us, start with the PDC, and then you move on to what we call the competitive levels, which are level 1, level 2, and level 3. Each level is broken down into obedience and protection. We tried, when we came up with the idea for the sport, to give a little bit of a gradual increase in difficulty in terms of the exercises, as well as difficulty in terms of the amount of pressure that the dog teams were going to face as they went up in level. So the level 1 basically has a surprise scenario element, but what we decided to do was to create a number of surprise protection scenarios, and then on the day of the trial, the judge will pull a number out of the hat, and you have to prepare for all the 5 surprise scenarios in that level. You don't know which one's going to come on that day. So you have some basic elements in the level 1, which are scripted, right? Like our carjacking, handler attack, and then the courage test. You kind of know what to expect there. And then you have that wild card scenario, that 4th scenario, which is picked from the hat, and we get one of the 5 scenarios that you would be preparing for. The obedience is pretty straightforward in terms of the exercises that have to be shown. There is a decoy distraction in the obedience, and that really sets our sport apart from any other sport. Obedience level having decoy distractions. And so the decoy is sitting in a chair in the level 1. In the PDC, which is the entry level, there's no decoy on the field in obedience. And then as we go into level 2, now the decoys are moving around with you. They're up, they're standing. There's 2 of them instead of 1. And we get to level 3. That's where everything gets a little crazy in the obedience, and we have decoys moving around, showing agitation, things of that nature while you're doing your obedience routine. So a tremendous amount of drive capping and neutrality is required as you get into the level 3 from what you would expect in the level 1. Although even a decoy seated in a chair can be a very big attraction for many dogs moving out of the PDC. Now each level, and so as we go back to the level 2, we have decoys on the field in obedience. Now we have the handler doing lots of exercises like recalls, and now we have some jumping and tunnel exercises and things of that nature, changes of position. All the standard healing, which we had in the level 1, gets now transported into the level 2 with higher levels of decoy distraction. And then we move to protection in the level 2. And we again have 3 scripted scenarios. We have our dual attack, we have our call off, we have our fended attack. All of those have a certain amount of leeway for the judge to change certain things up. The dual attack, not as much as the other ones, but we can change some things in the fended. We can change some things on the call off, what it looks like, what the decoys are doing for the call off portion. And then we have a judge's surprise scenario. Now, instead of picking one of 5 pre-existing scenarios that you can kind of train for, now it's going to be just a bunch of suggestions that are in the rule book in terms of what could possibly be or what's prohibited at that level. And then we have the judge has to come up with a surprise scenario. And so now our talent that comes out with these dogs has to figure out, all right, what are some of the likely scenarios that I might see? What are some of the things that are expected? And then prepare for sort of the unpreparable, right? So we have that. So now we have that full surprise scenario in the level 2s. As we move to level 3, as I mentioned, now we have agitating decoys and obedience. You don't know what the pattern is going to look like. You don't know what necessarily is going to be expected and in what order. We have mandatory and some suggested exercises in the rule book, and the judge can play around with that. They can play around with the context. They can play around with the order. They can play around with very many things there in terms of what the decoys are going to be doing at any given time. If you get through that, then you go on to the protection in the level 3, which is kind of the thing everybody waits to see in our sport, right? That is 4 surprise scenarios with some basic guidance, some guidelines. In the level 3, there are some mandatory things that we have to see. We have to see, for example, a call-off. We have to see, in that case, either multiple call-offs or call-offs of multiple decoys. We have to see a courage test of some kind. And then really a lot of that is up to the judge. There can be muzzle attacks. There can be searching exercises. So there are a lot of things in that level which are a fairly discrete jump up from what's expected in the level 2. For me personally, when I was competing the last couple of years, it took, as I was going from my 2 to my 3, I took a year, almost an additional year off of trialing once I finished out Raptor in the 2s to get them into the level 3s, because there's so much more to have to prepare for. The context changes alone can be very daunting. Thinking about, okay, here I've got a basic exercise. How many different ways can that get served up? And that's really up to the judge's imagination. And so for this sport and its evolution into the future, I really feel like the sky is kind of the limit. We're seeing so much more success at the lower levels. Scores are getting higher. I really feel like the training is getting better, is getting more adaptive, and we're also seeing it at the upper levels. And so the judges have to be a little bit more creative. They have to start thinking a little bit more outside the box to keep challenging our trainers. But that's ultimately what my goal was when we sat out over 20 years ago, thinking about what would our sport look like as we sat with the people that designed it. And a lot of what appealed to us was, let's set the bar so high that we get a group of people that want to compete in the sport, even if it's a minority of dog trainers, that really want to excel. And I believe if we set the bar high enough, that American dog trainers and now dog trainers around the world would respond and they'd want to get better. Things that would make people cringe. I had a Belgian ring competitor watch in the early days and say that level 3 is just impossible to do. And sometimes it seemed impossible because we would go trial after trial after trial with failure, 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 nobody passing. And now we're at a point where the pass rate has gotten substantially better over time. So I really feel like our goal is being met in some ways where we challenge the trainers to get better, and the training has gotten better. And that's what makes me excited about the future of the sport. Because if we can make it as hard as we did in the beginning and people responded to that, I really feel like we're going to be able to continue making adjustments to the sport. It's going to be an evolution that'll continue into the future to make our trainers that much better, for them to have to respond. And PSA trainers look at difficulty, and rather than saying, well, that can't be done, or that's not fair, or I don't want to do that, that's kind of cover from some other trainers for, That's really hard. And for PSA trainers, we look at that stuff and we're always thinking about how can we do it? How can we get it done? How can we train these dogs to get to that higher level so we're a cut above? And for me, that really is exciting when I come to a championship trial as a competitor, or I come as a judge and I see the level each year getting better and better and better. And it's a pretty astounding thing to challenge people and see them rise to those challenges.